Hey guys, I'm your host Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to this week's episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. In case you're unaware, we also have a YouTube channel where you can find not only this podcast, but all sorts of Japanese urban legends, bizarre crimes, internet mysteries, ghost spots, and more. We also focus on old and indie Japanese horror games that never got or are unlikely to ever get official English translations. This includes a lot of sound and visual novels just like this show, but with more pictures, as well as a wide variety of other horror games. You can check it out at youtube.com/Kowabana Japan if you're looking for even more Japanese horror to tide you over between episodes. This week, we're dealing with some figures, supernatural and otherwise, that certainly left their mark on people. I can't say that I ever had an imaginary friend when I was young, but I certainly understand the loneliness that the kid in this next story feels. Other kids spy him spending a bunch of time talking to no one in particular, but what's really going on? Is he really talking to an invisible friend? Or something else? Find out in Friend. This happened when I was in elementary school. I lived in a rather large town, but everybody was moving away, so the population density wasn't so large. My elementary school was in the middle of the city. There weren't many schools around, so kids came from all over to go there. This was a time before perverts or criminals were as prevalent as they are today, so we all returned home in groups of just 2 or 3 kids. I think the kids who lived furthest from the school had to walk about an hour home each day. The sun set early during winter, so those kids went straight home without participating in club activities. Not only were there no mountain roads, but there weren't even any regular paved city roads to walk home on. So 2 or 3 of them made their way home following the lights in the distance of their village. I wonder if they go home in proper groups now. Anyway, there was one kid like that who didn't have any friends. He was in the same class as me. I'll call him K. He was a little slow, but he didn't go to a special school. He came to our school instead. As you might expect, none of the kids who walked home together would let him play with them. So he always walked home alone, his trip taking roughly half an hour. We lived in the countryside and he was mentally disabled, yet his parents never drove him to or from school. I sometimes watched him leave through the west gate, even though I used the east, and he was pretty much always alone. One day, our teacher said something during our morals class. "I've heard that someone has been dropping by places they shouldn't be on their way home." Everyone was surprised. Like, we sometimes stopped by a friend's house to play games, but it was something that everyone agreed to and looked the other way over. The teacher continued. "Now, we don't mind if you stop by a friend's house before it gets dark, but there's someone who has been playing somewhere dangerous. I'd like that to stop." Somewhere dangerous? I later learnt the truth about those rumors from a friend. He was talking about Kay. He's been playing under the bridge on his way home. That was true. There was a large river close to Kay's house, and they had just recently built a new bridge over it. The old bridge was still there to the side of it as well. The new bridge joined to the city roads, however, which the old one didn't, so nobody used it anymore. It was an old stone bridge. A large riverbed spread out beneath the new bridge, with stairs leading down so people could easily reach it. There was grass down there as tall as a kid, and the light from the sun couldn't reach it, so it was like it was its own secret area. It was like a secret playground during the day, and I'd been there with friends before shooting air guns at the water. Kay never joined us for that though. Still, that was the new bridge. Apparently, Kei had been playing beneath the old one. Some of the kids who returned home the same way as him saw him playing beneath the old bridge as they crossed over the new one. They thought he was just being a stupid kid, so they ignored him. But when they told their parents about it, they quickly contacted the school to let them know. Kei was called to the staff room during lunch, but he showed no signs that he was going to stop playing there. I overheard a teacher stop him as he was about to head home. "It's important to play with your friends, but please don't do so in such dangerous places." He hit the nail on the head. I laughed. But still, something didn't feel right. Kei was always alone, and he was apparently alone under the bridge as well. Of course, no matter how much they warned him, Kei continued playing under that bridge. I went to visit a friend's house with another friend on the night of our local festival. We played with fireworks as the sun set, and we could hear the sounds of the festival in the distance, and we enjoyed the rarity of being able to play together at night. When we were done with the fireworks, we were allowed to stay there for the night. "I saw Kei's friend," one of my friends suddenly said, as though it was something he shouldn't have seen. He probably kept it quiet all this time because of how creepy it was. "He's always chatting excitedly with some graffiti beneath the bridge." Everyone fell silent. Twilight. Cicadas cried. Was Kei with his friend, like always? One winter day, something terrible happened. A missing child report came in over the wireless. Kei had gone missing. He was so late that his parents phoned the school, but they were told that he had left long ago. Then, it started raining heavily. My father was a civil servant, and his phone was ringing off the hook. He grabbed his coat, put on his rain boots, and then left the house. "Do you know what he looks like?" he asked me. I said yes, so he let me in the car too. Of course, we went straight for the river. The police, our teacher, and even some of our classmates who lived nearby were already there. Everyone had gathered like a typhoon. In the end, we didn't find Kei. He wasn't on the riverbed or anywhere. Beneath the bridge, there was a large circle painted in red, and inside it was something that looked like a human face. Several years have passed since then. We never found him. I wonder if any trace of that graffiti is still there. I wonder if Kei is still playing with that friend, even now. You can often find Jizos statues all around Japan, on roadsides, by temples, beneath tiny little roofs in the middle of nowhere. They're generally there to help guide people on their way, particularly those who have passed. And in this next story, one village involved in a bitter rivalry with another has 19 Jizo statues located in its shrine. But what exactly are those statues for? Find out in 19 Jizos. I live in the countryside in Hiroshima, and for some reason, our village doesn't get along with the neighboring village. I'll call ours A village, and the neighboring one B. It's strange, but for some reason our villages just don't get along, and nobody knows why. You can ask somebody from either village, and they won't be able to give you a reason. It's a mystery. If I was forced to say, it's probably something that started with our ancestors, meaning they didn't get along for some reason and always fought. It's also forbidden for anyone from A and B villages to get married with each other. But that's not all. My grandfather and other relatives always told me never to go to B village as well. It's not like it's a Burakumin village or anything. They're exactly the same as the people from A village. Why can't I go there? I asked him when I was just a child. Because B Village is cursed, and something terrible will happen to you if you go, my grandfather said. Whenever someone from here passes by the guardian statues that border our two villages, something terrible always happens to them. For example, there are always accidents at the intersection near B Village. Those who get hurt are always from here. And one girl who opposed us and left to get married in B Village immediately died. And the river that flows through their village suddenly gets deep, and every 5 to 10 years someone dies there. That person is always from our village. Of course, I had no idea if any what he was saying was true or not. To be honest, I didn't believe in curses to begin with. I tried asking him why someone from A village always got hurt when they went to B village. Because of the curse of the 19 Jizos, he said. The 19 Jizos he spoke of were statues inside the shrine in B village. I had seen them before, and although they looked really old, they just looked like normal Jizo statues to me. Why do they curse people? I asked. That I don't know, he said half-heartedly. The younger generation cared nothing for this ancient custom. I even had friends from B village that I often played with. I asked him if he'd ever been told not to play in our village, and he said he'd never heard anything like that before. My grandfather's old-fashioned words sounded even stupider than ever, and I paid no attention to what he said. One day, I went to swim in the river by B village with my older brother. Our grandfather had forbidden it, but of course, we paid him no mind. Yet, we hadn't even been swimming for more than 10 minutes when my brother said we were leaving. I had zero ability to see ghosts, but in contrast, my brother possessed a strong ability to see them. Why? We just got in, I said. Just do it! We're going home. The expression on his face surprised me. I grabbed my clothes and returned home in my wet shorts. Hey, why are we leaving? I asked again. You didn't see it? See what? It was kinda hard to tell, but there were about 20 black shadows there, and they were looking at us real angrily. I linked those 20 shadows with the 19 Jizos in my head, and a bad feeling washed over me. It wasn't until I started university that I really understood why both villages didn't like each other. A certain document was discovered in A village's shrine. It said that towards the end of the 1500s, both our villages fought over who held the water rights to the river. In the end, A village won. As indicated by Toyotomi Hideyoshi's sword hunt, villages from before that time weren't as weak as their descendants seemed to think, and they were well armed. The line between soldier and farmer was blurry and vague. That was why they proudly recorded their victory over B village. But the generations passed, and we entered the peaceful Edo period. This turbulent record went from a proud memory to a miserable one. As such, it was hidden away inside A village's shrine. Yet this record was an important piece of medieval history, and it disputed the fact that farmers at the time were nothing but weak peasants. It even made the local news, and scholars from various universities came to study it. I'll summarize one particular section from it here. A village and B village fought over water rights to the river. A village led a surprise attack, which saw their victory in the war and gave them rights over the river. They suffered few casualties in the war, and only 5 people were lightly injured. 16 people from B village were killed. In addition, 2 women and 1 child got wrapped up in the fighting, and also died. Amongst those 19 were the village head of B village and the chief priest of the shrine. My grandfather misunderstood the curse of the 19 Jizos. B village built them to mourn the dead. Yet the Jizos weren't enough, and even today, those 19 still hold a deep, deep grudge against A village. Much like the Greek gods, Kami-sama are said to be similar to humans in that they have their own likes and dislikes. These preferences even extend to people. But what would you do if a kami took a particular liking to you? It might not always be as nice as it sounds. Find out why in To Be Loved by a God. A fortune teller once told me, "You won't live a long life." She then told me why. "You've been overseas, haven't you? I think something attached itself to you there, but it wasn't an evil spirit. It's more like a kami. There's no way for you to get rid of it, and no matter what you do or where you go, nobody will be able to help you." As she said, I had lived in China for a few years before that. Well, as long as you're in Japan, you have until your son becomes an adult. I can see a white fox behind you. It's very strong, but there are members of your family who worship Masakado, aren't there? You should be thankful to your grandparents. And your aunt too, yes? And there's someone else in a monastery. She is watching over you from afar. But you still only have a few years left. My son was already 15. I only had 5 more years left until I had to say goodbye? Why was she so sure about that? She continued when she saw my dubious face. "You cut your hand in the past, didn't you?" I had. I used to play jazz piano and got quite a few jobs out of it too, but then I had a car accident and it cut the tendons in my left hand, making it difficult to move after that. Playing the piano became impossible. That thing did it. But because you have so many people looking out for you, your life was saved. But it's telling me that next time will be the last. I'm sorry. I have nothing but bad news for you. Having said that, the fortune teller refused to take any money from me. I only had 5 more years? I couldn't believe it, and I still don't believe it. But that fortune teller came highly recommended. Her regular fee was high, and after talking for so long, she refused to take the money, instead insisting that I use it for what little time I had left. I spoke to my husband and son when I returned home. I told them that I didn't believe it, but still. "I'm worried about what will happen to you when I die." "We'll get through it," they said. "Don't worry. You should enjoy the rest of the time you have." As it stands right now, I'm perfectly healthy, but nobody knows how they're going to die. I went to visit a famous shrine a few days after seeing the fortune teller to discuss being cleansed, but they said, "We'd rather not interfere with the Kami-sama. Our lives will be in danger as well if we do." "I'm sorry, but what type of Kami-sama is it?" I asked. "It comes from hell. It's holding your left hand. It's not from Japan." "But I don't really believe in that sort of stuff," I said. "I can't see it either." "That feeling is important," the priest said. "Why me?" "They're just like people. They have their own likes and dislikes. There has long been a saying that if a kami-sama takes a liking to you, then you won't live for long. This is the same thing. But I'm not even that young anymore, I said. You're still rather young in terms of the human lifespan, the priest said. Every day I visit our family's Inari shrine, as well as the Masakado shrine in the neighborhood. But recently, I realized my right shoulder has started to feel heavy. And I've started having a lot of dreams, even though I never really used to dream at all. In the dream, I'm sitting in a mansion somewhere playing the piano. Being able to move my left hand again feels nice, and I want to stay there forever. Then a hand rests on my right shoulder and says, "Then you should stay here forever." And then I wake up. Yet, maybe one day, I won't. Even though it's a true story, I'd love to say that I don't believe it. Yet I've been told the same thing by two completely different people, so I'm scared. Well, at the very least, I hope that my death doesn't bother anyone. I've already told my family that I don't want to be buried after I die. I want them to scatter my ashes instead. I also wrote in my will that I was happy to have my organs donated, or my body given to science. But my son and husband don't like that idea, so I doubt it'll happen. But if a Kami-sama is going to take me away, then wouldn't I have been an even more famous pianist than I was? Is that what it likes about me? I don't know. I feel like that can't be the full reason. But anyway, once 5 years have passed, if I am still doing well, you better believe I'm gonna go see that fortune teller and priest and give them a piece of my mind. I've gone to see other fortune tellers, but the moment they see my face, they tell me to go away. They can't help me. So that does make me a little afraid. Yet, after 5 years, I'm not sick, so what am I supposed to do? I just go about my life. That's it. When I had my car accident, apparently the Kannon statue in my family's altar room split in half. They've since fixed it. Everything the fortune teller said about my family came true. On the one hand, it's like a whole bunch of people are protecting me, and on the other, someone is trying to take me away. On the one hand, sometimes I think it would be nice to pass away while I'm still dreaming. But another part of me wants to storm in on that fortune teller after 5 years and call her a fake. But she commands a respectable price and comes from a totally different lineage to me, so, you know. If I'm still alive after 5 years, I'll come back here and let you know. As a short postscript for that previous story, the poster never returned again. You can take that as you will. In this next story, a young boy goes to stay with his grandparents in the countryside. While there, some distant relatives visit and ask him to stay with them for a while, where he meets an old woman who is perhaps not quite as she seems. Find out why in Kikkui-san. This happened when I was in elementary school. I remember things from my childhood clearly, but for some reason, this one is vague. Maybe it's mixed in with a dream, but I'll do my best to explain it clearly. My older sister was sickly. Sometimes she would feel better, but she had no strength, so during the summer holidays, she traveled to a hospital regularly with my parents. While they were doing that, I went to stay with my grandparents on my mother's side to run around and enjoy the holidays as much as I could. One summer, some relatives of my grandparents came to visit them. "Why don't you come and stay with us for a bit?" one of them said. I wasn't one to back down from a challenge, so I instantly agreed. They were a little older than my parents, probably in their 40s or 50s. My grandparents' house was already in the mountains, but these relatives lived even further in, another 2 mountains away. There was a small village full of houses with thatched roofs there. Not such a rare sight. We passed a dam on the way in, so even now I still remember where it is. These relatives didn't have any children at home, and along the mountain there was another house detached from the rest. Apparently an old woman even older than my grandparents lived there. The relatives called her Kikkui-san. Their pronunciation was strange, so maybe her name was really Kikkui-san or something. Kikkui-san's house was full of stuff, and as a kid I had a lot of fun. There were traditional Japanese dolls, temari balls, old furniture, and lots of small dresses around the place. Even though the couple had invited me to stay with them, they mostly left me to myself and spent most of their time working in the fields or mountains. Thinking back on it now, I think they invited me over to keep Kikkui-san company because she was blind. She was a kind old lady, and she told me all sorts of funny tales. She told me a story about a man who was deceived by a tanuki and entered the deep part of a river to bathe, which he thought was a bath, and then caught a cold. And apparently there was a large famous stone nearby where an accident had once taken place too. She never got angry, regardless of what I played with in her house, so I had fun with everything. I think she even had a rocking horse and a seesaw there. But the strangest thing of all were the small dresses that were all over the floor. You had to push things in here and there and then push in a small stick to get the mechanism to work, and then the drawers would open. The dresses were about as big as I was at the time. They smelt nice when I opened them too, like scented sachets were in there. Kikkui-san called them her troublesome dresses. She handmade the scented sachets that were in them. She was really good with her hands, despite the fact that she couldn't see, and I used to watch her all the time. Judging by the smell, there was probably tea, Japanese mugwort, and cinnamon in there. When I told the couple about how I played with the troublesome dresses, they got really angry at me. "That's not something you should let children play with!" They yelled at Kikkui-san as well. They normally spoke to her so politely, so I was shocked. "There's nothing inside, so there's nothing to worry about," she said. But there were 10 or so scented sachets in there, so I wasn't so sure about that. Still, if I said anything about that, I feared I would get in trouble again, so I said nothing. But I was nervous. Kikkui-san later told me a story about the troublesome dresses. Long ago, an oni from the east approached the village and stole away little girls to eat. Their souls fled to the troublesome dresses, so he was unable to eat them. One day, the oni tried to eat a pregnant woman. She confused the oni with her quick wits and instead ate the oni herself. By eating that troublesome oni, she had not only protected herself and her baby, but the entire village, so they praised her for her actions. Yet, the souls inside the troublesome dresses had no idea that the oni was gone, so they stayed inside the whole time, unable to pass on to the other side. Night after night, they stood by the bedside of their families and relatives, crying. The villagers were at a loss for what to do. I don't remember what happened after that, but hearing that the souls of people who had been eaten by an oni were in the dresses creeped me out. I never touched them again after that. My grandparents passed away long ago, and I asked my mother about who those relatives were, but she said she knew nothing about them. I don't think I ever saw them at my grandparents' funerals either. As for Kikkui-san, when I asked my grandparents about her in high school, They said that she was like a spirit medium who found lost items, so it wasn't completely a dream. She was a real person. And considering her age, she has likely passed on as well now. I went for a drive with my girlfriend around that area a while back. I suddenly felt nostalgic and made my way towards the dam, but a landslide caused by a typhoon had blocked the area off, so we couldn't go in. I don't think they would have left the road like that if the village still existed on the other side, so I don't think anyone lives there now. Our last story for this week takes a look at another kami-sama. This one is enshrined in a certain family home and has a few strange tales to tell. Find out why in Miyauchi-sama. This isn't a particularly scary, but rather strange story. A kami-sama is enshrined in our house. We don't live in a shrine or anything. And it's not in a small kamidana or anything, but rather in a large 8 tatami mat wide room, with an altar that takes up the entire space. Inside there are small bags of rice, sacred rope, sake bottles, beer for some reason, bags of snacks, and even sacks of salt piled up everywhere. We call it Miyauchi-sama, and this kami-sama seems to have been shared with us from a shrine somewhere else. How do you even share a kami-sama? So, long ago, when I was just a kid, I ate some of the snacks that were dedicated to Miyauchi-sama. Being a kid, I wasn't really the brightest at hiding my work, so I hid the wrappers behind the TV and they were soon discovered. My father blew his top, and I got in quite a bit of trouble for it. In the end, he told me to go and apologize to Miyauchi-sama, and I followed him to the other house, tears streaming down my face. Miyauchi-sama was enshrined in what used to be the main wing of the house, and there was a long hall connecting that to where we lived at the time. That building was 6 tatami mats large, with a sliding screen in the middle that separated it into 2 8 tatami mat rooms. Miyauchi-sama was in the room behind the sliding screens once you entered. For some reason, there was an old guy with a beard standing in front of the doors. It was all too much for me, and I froze. The man stared at me, and then said one thing. "Don't cry." His voice sounded rather young. Of course, I just started crying even more and ran back to my parents. My grandfather overheard me and seemed happy. "You saw Miyauchi-sama, huh?" But I was so scared that I couldn't go back near there again. It wasn't like I was cursed or anything, but when I think about it now, I was so scared that it felt like I'd done something wrong. It wasn't a very scary story, so I was happy with their unexpected response. As a bonus, Miyauchi-sama has a formal name, but I've forgotten what it is. It was a whole bunch of difficult kanji all lined up together. Long ago, I asked my grandfather to tell me about our history with Miyauchi-sama, but all he would say was, "We received him. We received him." I went to my uncle and heard the full story instead. Apparently my great-great-grandfather gave a large amount of money to rebuild a shrine somewhere, maybe a Tenjin shrine, and in thanks they allowed us to keep a shrine for Miyauchi-sama here. Of course my uncle knew the story. He was the eldest son after all. The priest from that shrine visited for my great-grandmother's funeral, which was when he heard all about it. But it wasn't like we had to carry out any special rituals to keep him enshrined. At the very least, we had to offer some mochi at New Year's and provide him with a tray's worth of food each meal. It's kinda surreal seeing a plate of curry placed before an altar. My cousin is set to take over running the family. He's a 32-year-old virgin. And he's already claiming he'll become Miyauchi-sama's bride. Out of our family, the only ones to have ever seen him are my great-grandmother, now deceased, and me. My great-grandmother's story is a bit scarier though. My grandfather also heard what sounded like rumbling footsteps that shook the earth early in the morning, and ever since then, he's fully believed that Miyauchi-sama goes for a walk at night. Because of that, the house gate is always left open. He also left some sneakers the same size as his as an offering a while back. At any rate, he's a trustworthy head of the family that everyone trusts, so I think people will continue to look after Miyauchi-sama for a while yet. Now let me tell you about my great-grandmother's scary story. She had already passed away before I was born, so this is all hearsay. There are certain details I wasn't able to get from the relative who told me, so it'll be the gist of the story. Also, my cousin has already been decided as the family successor. He is the oldest son of the oldest son, after all. But if he doesn't have any kids, then either mine, I don't have any, or my younger sister's children, she also doesn't have any, will probably be adopted by him to become the next heir. But that's just a title at any rate, and no one pays much attention to it. It's not like we're a family of Shinto priests, so I doubt it has much to do with seeing Miyauchi-sama. On top of that, I can't see ghosts or anything like that. I've never felt a sense of foreboding or suffered from sleep paralysis or anything. Even if I visit a ghost spot, nothing happens. Seeing Miyauchi-sama is the only strange experience I've ever had. The biggest impression I had of him was his large eyes. The rest of his body was kind of vague and hazy, like a statue. He had hair, but I don't remember what hairstyle it was. It wasn't long though. And I don't really remember the shape of his nose either. But he had a really long beard. That's probably why I can't picture his mouth. I was panicking, so I didn't look at him for very long. Plus, they're memories from when I was a small kid, so sorry I can't really compare him to anyone for you. Right, let's get to my great-grandmother's story. My great-grandmother married into our family for love. This was apparently quite rare at the time, and our family was well known around town, so people were rather jealous of her. Other family members liked her a lot as well. She was a very gentle person apparently. So there were no problems, and after she joined the family, things went well. However, one day, 1 or 2 years after she got married, she started acting strange. She'd never once acted out, yet she suddenly started passing out, skipping meals and losing weight, and she'd wander around the house night after night, yet claim to remember none of it. Realizing that something was wrong, her husband called in a spirit medium to take a look at her. There's a bit of confusion over who it was that came to see her. It was either a priest from the shrine, a shaman my great-great-grandfather knew, or someone from a temple. I doubt it was this. Our family has nothing to do with Buddhism. There's also some confusion over what diagnosis she received. Some claimed that she was possessed by someone who had long hated the family. Another suggestion was that a family with an inugami possessed her. Maybe it was a kitsune possession. Perhaps a mountain kami-sama had taken a liking to her. At any rate, something was wrong with her, and anyone could see that just by looking at her. By the way, our family home is in one of the leading prefectures for depopulation, and there are apparently a lot of families around that have something to do with inugami. So that might be a type of discrimination. So anyway, she was purified, but it had no effect. At a loss for what to do and growing more desperate, the family decided to have her sleep in Miyauchi-sama's room. This went on for several nights, and she would wake up late into the night to a foul smell coming from somewhere. She got up to see what it was and tried to wake her husband, who was sleeping next to her, but he wouldn't budge. She remembered wondering what to do when she noticed something walking around in the garden. It was summer or something, so the sliding screens were open. It looked somewhat like a monkey and occasionally crawled around on all fours, walking around the rock in the middle of the garden. My great-grandmother had been a little slow in realizing what was going on, but when she did, she trembled and held her breath. The thing continued around the rock in the garden at a regular pace, but then suddenly it hid behind it and didn't come out again. A short while later, it emerged from the same spot and started going around the rock in the opposite direction, and then went straight towards my great-grandmother. She tried desperately to wake her husband up, but he still wouldn't move. Before long, the thing had reached the eaves of the building. Just when she thought it was all over, a massive, hairy hand reached out from the roof and grabbed the thing before withdrawing with it. It was gone, and my great-grandmother passed out in fear. When she woke up the next morning, she found herself lying in bed, despite the awkward position she'd passed out in. Yet, Miyauchi-sama's kamidana was a right mess. Both my great-grandfather and his father claimed that Miyauchi-sama had protected her, and after that, she returned to normal. Before long, they switched out his altar for a much larger one as well. When she was alive, my great-grandmother often said about the incident, "That was when I really felt like I'd been accepted as a family member." Anyway, that's the story. Some parts of it may have been exaggerated to try and scare me, but I did my best to tell it how I heard it. Sounds pretty crazy though, right? Parts of it had to be fake. If you want to chat about this week's or any of the stories featured on Kowabana, come and join us in the Discord. You can find the link on kowabana.net. And make sure to follow us on YouTube for even more terrifying stories each and every day. You can find us at youtube.com/Kowabana Japan. We also have over 100 exclusive bonus episodes over on our Patreon that you can start listening to right now and help support this show. You can find that at patreon.com/Tara-A-Devlin. Thanks guys, stay safe, and I'll see you again next time for even more Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kowabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kowabana.net now.